The air in the old church smelled of lilies and wax, a faint sweetness that clung to the back of my throat as I stood there, trembling in a white silk gown that felt more like a shroud than a wedding dress. The pews gleamed under the soft glow of amber lights, their polished wood reflecting the flicker of candles lining the aisle. Outside, the night pressed against the stained glass windows, casting fractured shadows across the stone floor. I was Catherine Sullivan, Kate to those who knew me, though no one here did. And at 34, I was about to bind myself to a man I barely knew. James Carver, Jim to the world, a 42-year-old titan of finance, stood beside me, his broad shoulders squared in a tailored black tuxedo, his face a mask of cool indifference. The priest's voice droned on, a low hum that blurred into the pounding of my pulse. My hands clutched the silver ring on my finger, a thin band that had once belonged to my grandmother, its cool metal grounding me as the words I dreaded loomed closer. This wasn't a marriage born of love or even choice. It was a transaction, a cold, calculated deal to save my father. He sat in the front row, his gray suit wrinkled, his eyes darting nervously to the handful of guests, business associates of Jim's, their faces unfamiliar and sharp-edged. Dad had been a lawyer once, a good one, until a lawsuit and a string of bad decisions left him drowning in debt. Jim's money was the lifeline to keep him out of prison, and I was the price. Do you, Catherine Sullivan, take this man? The priest's words hit me like a slap. I swallowed hard, my throat dry, and forced out a whisper. I do. My voice cracked, barely audible, but it was enough. Jim's turn came next, his I do steady and clipped, as if he were signing a contract, which, in a way, he was. His dark eyes met mine for a fleeting second, unreadable before he looked away. We begin here, he said, his tone low and final, like a judge's gavel falling. I wanted to scream, to tear off this dress and run into the night, but my feet stayed rooted. Duty held me there, duty to Dad, who'd begged me with tears in his eyes, and to Lily, my little sister, 22 and halfway through college, counting on me to keep our fractured family afloat. Mom had been gone 10 years, taken by cancer when I was 24, and her absence still ached like a bruise that never healed. She'd raised us to stand tall, to fight for what mattered. But what was I fighting for now? A father who'd gambled away our stability? A sister who didn't even know the full story? The ring on my finger felt heavier as I adjusted it, my thumb brushing its smooth edge. It was the only piece of my past I'd brought into this moment. Gran's ring, passed to Mom, then to me after she died. Its faint chill reminded me of the nights Mom would sit with me, her hands warm around mine, promising we'd always have each other. Now, standing here, I had no one. The guests clapped politely, a hollow sound that echoed off the high ceiling, and Jim offered his arm. I took it, my fingers stiff against the crisp fabric of his sleeve, and we walked down the aisle, as man and wife. You're my wife now, he said as we stepped into the vestibule, his voice flat, possessive. I turned to him, my chest tight, and met his gaze. Only a title, I shot back, the words sharper than I'd intended. His jaw tightened, but he didn't reply, just nodded toward the black Bentley waiting outside. The driver opened the door, and I slid in, the leather cold against my skin. Jim followed, his presence filling the space, silent and imposing. The car pulled away, headlights cutting through the dark, and I stared out the window at the passing trees, their branches skeletal against the night sky. My mind drifted to Lily. Her last text had been a cheerful, "Good luck, sis," with a heart emoji, oblivious to the weight of this day. She was the reason I'd said yes, the reason I'd let Dad convince me that this was the only way. He'd sat me down a month ago, his hand shaking, and said, "Kate, I'm finished without this. Jim's offering a way out. For me. for Lily's future. I'd wanted to ask why his mistakes always became my burden, but the words had stuck in my throat. The church faded behind us, and the city lights loomed ahead, a glittering promise I didn't trust. Jim shifted beside me, his cufflinks catching the dim light. Gold, engraved with a crest I didn't recognize. Everything about him screamed power, from the sharp lines of his suit to the way he carried himself, like a man who'd never known doubt. But I wasn't here to admire him. I was here because I had no choice, because family, however broken, still meant something to me. The car slowed as we approached a gated estate, the iron bars parting silently to let us in. A mansion rose before us, all glass and stone, its windows glowing like eyes in the dark. This was my new home, a prison dressed up as a palace. Jim stepped out first, offering his hand, but I ignored it, climbing out on my own. The night air bit at my bare arms, and I pulled the shawl tighter, the silk slipping against my skin. "Welcome to your life," he said, his voice carrying a hint of something. Mockery, maybe, or challenge. I didn't look at him, just clutched. Gran's ring and walked toward the door, my heels clicking on the stone path. Inside, the foyer stretched high and wide, a chandelier dripping crystals above a marble floor. It was beautiful, cold, and empty, just like this marriage. I stopped, turning to face him as the door clicked shut behind us. "What do you expect from me?" I asked, my voice steady despite the storm inside. He studied me, his expression unyielding. "Everything," he said simply, then walked past me, leaving me alone in the vast, silent space. The penthouse stretched around me like a cage of glass and steel, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a view of Manhattan's skyline. That should have felt breathtaking, but instead left me hollow. The lights of the city blinked like distant stars, cold and unreachable, mirroring the silence that had settled over my life since the wedding 2 weeks ago. I, Catherine Sullivan, Kate to the few who mattered, lived here now, a stranger in my own story, married to James Carver, a man whose presence was as imposing as the black leather sofa dominating the room. The place was pristine, all sharp angles and white walls, with no trace of warmth or clutter, nothing to suggest a home, only a showcase of wealth. Jim was gone tonight, off to some late meeting with men in suits who spoke in numbers and power. I'd grown used to his absences, preferring them to the tension that crackled when he was near. Alone, I could breathe, could pretend I wasn't tethered to this deal. A marriage to save my father from ruin, to keep my sister Lily's dreams alive. But pretending only went so far. Tonight, restless, I wandered into his study, a room I'd avoided until now. The air smelled of leather and ink, the desk a slab of dark wood cluttered with papers and a single silver pen. My fingers trailed the edge, hesitating, until curiosity, or defiance, pushed me to open the top drawer. Inside, nestled among files, was a small wooden music box, its surface worn smooth by time. I lifted it, surprised by its weight, and turned the tiny crank. A melody spilled out, slow and mournful, a tune that tugged at something deep inside me, like a memory I couldn't place. The lid creaked as I opened it, revealing a faded photograph. A young girl, maybe 16, with dark hair and a shy smile, and beneath it, scrawled in faint ink, Anna, 1995. My breath caught. Who was she? Before I could think, the front door clicked open, and Jim's voice cut through the silence. "What are you doing?" I froze, the box still in my hands, as he strode into the room. His tie was loosened, his dark eyes narrowing as they landed on me. "Don't touch what isn't yours," he said, his voice low and sharp, snatching the box from my grip. The music stopped abruptly, leaving a void that felt heavier than before. I stood, my heart pounding, and faced him. "Then tell me what is mine here," I shot back, my words edged with a bitterness I hadn't meant to let slip. "Because I feel like nothing in this place belongs to me, not even my own life." His jaw clenched, a muscle ticking beneath the surface. But he didn't answer. Instead, he turned away, placing the box back in the drawer with a care that contradicted his tone. "Stay out of my things," he muttered, then walked out, leaving me standing there, the echo of his steps fading down the hall. I sank onto the desk chair, my hands trembling, and stared at the closed drawer. Anna. The name burned in my mind, a question I couldn't shake. Who was she to him? A sister? A lover? And why did he guard her memory like a wound he couldn't bear to touch? I left the study, the penthouse's silence pressing in again, and found myself on the sofa, my legs curled beneath me. The city lights shimmered beyond the glass, indifferent to my turmoil. My thumb brushed Grand's silver ring. Its familiar, chill a small comfort as I tried to piece together the man I'd married. Jim was a fortress, cold, unyielding, built of secrets I wasn't sure I wanted to uncover. Yet that melody lingered, soft and sad, stirring memories of Mom. She'd had a saying, "Find the light in the dark, Kate." I'd clung to it after she died, through the years of Dad's unraveling, through Lily's quiet strength. Was there light here? In this man? In this life? The rain started then, a steady patter against the windows, its rhythm soothing the jagged edges of my thoughts. I stood, moving to the kitchen, a sleek space of marble and stainless steel, and filled the kettle. The simple act of making tea felt like defiance, a reclaiming of something small in a world that wasn't mine. As the water boiled, I thought of Lily. She'd called yesterday, her voice bright with stories of college, unaware of the weight I carried. "You're the strongest person I know," she'd said once, years ago, when I'd worked double shifts to pay her tuition after Dad's first collapse. Strong. The word felt like a lie now. The kettle whistled, and I poured the steaming water over a tea bag, the scent of chamomile rising like a whisper of home. I cradled the mug, its warmth seeping into my palms, and returned to the sofa, the rain a soft curtain beyond the glass. My phone buzzed, a missed call from Dad. I didn't call back. He'd thank me again, apologize again, and I wasn't ready to hear it. Not tonight. Then I heard it, a faint murmur from Jim's office down the hall. I set the mug down, my pulse quickening, and crept closer. His voice, low and strained, filtered through the door he'd left ajar. "Anna wouldn't want this," he said, the words heavy with something raw, regret, maybe, or grief. He was on the phone, but I couldn't hear the other side, only the silence that followed, thick and telling. I stepped back, my breath shallow, and retreated to the living room, the tea cooling on the table. Anna. That name again. It was a crack in his armor, a glimpse of the man behind the mask. I didn't know what it meant, but it shifted something in me. A spark of curiosity, or maybe resolve. I wasn't here just to survive this marriage, to be a shadow in his world. I'd find out who Anna was, why she mattered, and what that said about the stranger I'd vowed to stand beside. The rain tapped on, a quiet companion, and I sipped. My tea, the taste bitter and sweet, like the questions I couldn't let go. The restaurant glowed like a jewel box, its golden chandeliers casting a warm haze over the crowd of Manhattan's elite. The air buzzed with the clink of wine glasses, the murmur of polished voices, and the faint strains of a string quartet tucked in the corner. I stood at the edge of it all, Catherine Sullivan, Kate to those who'd once known me, dressed in a plain gray dress that clung to me like a quiet rebellion. The invitation had called this a charity dinner, but it felt more like a stage, and I was the unwilling actress in James Carver's latest production. Jim, my husband of 3 weeks, loomed beside me, his black suit impeccable, his presence, a wall of authority I couldn't breach. "Smile," he said under his breath, his hand brushing my elbow as we moved through the room. His voice was a command, not a request, and I felt the weight of every eye on us. Bankers, socialites, men and women who measured worth in dollars and influence. I didn't smile. Instead, I kept my lips pressed tight, my gaze fixed on the far wall where a painting of a serene lake mocked the storm brewing inside me. This wasn't my world, and I wasn't here to play the part of the perfect wife. Not tonight. Not ever. The deal was simple. I'd married Jim to save my father from financial ruin, to keep my sister Lily's college fund intact. But simplicity ended where Jim's expectations began. He'd handed me a crimson gown that morning, all silk and shimmer, with a note. "Wear this. Look the part." I'd left it draped over the chair in our bedroom, a penthouse I still couldn't call home, and chosen this gray dress instead, its muted color a silent protest. He hadn't said a word when he saw me, but the flicker in his jaw told me he'd noticed. We reached our table, a centerpiece of white roses and crystal, and I sat, my hands folding in my lap. Jim leaned in, his breath warm against my ear. "You're embarrassing me," he said, his tone low but edged with steel. I turned to him, meeting those dark eyes that seemed to see everything and nothing. "I'm not your doll to dress up," I replied, my voice steady despite the tremor in my chest. His grip tightened on the stem of his wineglass, but he didn't respond, just nodded to a man approaching us, a silver-haired investor with a shark's smile. "James, good to see you," the man said, then glanced at me. "And this must be the lovely Mrs. Carver." I didn't extend my hand, didn't nod, just stared back until he shifted uncomfortably and moved on. Jim's silence grew heavier, a storm gathering behind his calm facade. I knew I was pushing him, testing the limits of this arrangement, but I couldn't stop. Every forced smile, every polite word felt like a betrayal of who I was, or who I'd been before this. The room spun on, a carousel of wealth and pretense, until a woman in a sequined dress approached, her perfume sharp and cloying. "You two make such a striking pair," she cooed, her eyes darting between us. "How did you meet?" I opened, my mouth ready to let the truth spill. A contract, a desperate father, a life sold. But Jim cut in, smooth as glass. "A mutual acquaintance," he said, his hand resting on mine, a warning disguised as affection. I pulled away, my skin prickling, and caught a flash from the corner of my eye. A camera, a man in a cheap suit snapping photos, whispering to a colleague. "Trouble in paradise already?" one of them muttered, loud enough for me to hear. That was it, the breaking point. I stood, my chair scraping against the hardwood floor, and walked toward the exit, the hum of the room fading behind me. Jim caught up in the hallway, his hand closing around my wrist. "Where do you think you're going?" he demanded, his voice a low growl. I yanked free, facing him. "Anywhere but here," I said, my words sharp enough to cut. "I didn't sign up to be your trophy." His eyes flashed, a mix of anger and something else. Frustration, maybe, or hurt. But he let me go, stepping back as I pushed through the glass doors into the night. The air outside was cool, tinged with the scent of rain and exhaust, and I leaned against the brick wall, my breath ragged. My heels ached, and I bent down, slipping them off one by one, the pavement rough against my bare feet. The gray dress hung loose now, its hem brushing my calves, and I felt a strange relief in its simplicity, like shedding a costume I'd never wanted to wear. I pulled my phone from my clutch, dialing Lily's number, needing her voice to anchor me. It rang, then clicked to voicemail. "Hey, it's Lily. Leave a message." I hung up, the silence louder than the city around me. Back inside, I could Still hear the murmur of the dinner, the clatter of plates, the laughter that didn't reach me. Jim would be there, smoothing over my exit with that effortless charm he wielded like a weapon. I didn't care. Let them whisper. Let them judge. I wasn't here for their approval, or his. But as I stood there, barefoot and alone, Gran's ring glinted on my finger, a quiet reminder of the promises I'd made. Not to Jim, but to Dad, to Lily, to the family I'd fought to hold together since Mom died. Was this rebellion worth it? Or was it just another crack in a foundation already crumbling? A cab pulled up, its yellow paint chipped, and I climbed in, the leather seat sticking to my legs. "Just drive," I told the driver, my voice hoarse. The city blurred past, neon signs, shadowed streets, a world that didn't pause for my chaos. I pressed my forehead to the window, the glass cool against my skin, and wondered how long I could keep this up. Living a lie, wearing a mask, pretending I could outrun the weight of my own choices. The cab rolled on, and I clutched Gran's ring, its edges biting into my palm, a lifeline I wasn't ready to let go. The penthouse was a fortress of shadows that night, its glass walls reflecting the flicker of the fireplace like a fragile heartbeat. Outside, a late autumn chill pressed against the windows, the wind howling low and restless. But inside, the air was thick with the scent of burning cedar. I, Catherine Sullivan, Kate to the ghosts of my past, lay curled on the king-sized bed, a quilt pulled tight around me, my body trembling not just from the cold, but from a fever that had crept in like an uninvited guest. The gray dress from the charity dinner hung in the closet, a silent witness to my rebellion 3 days ago. But now I felt small, fragile, stripped of the defiance that had fueled me then. I'd woken that morning with a throat raw as sandpaper, my head pounding, and by evening, I could barely lift myself from the pillows. Jim had been gone all day. Another meeting, another world I wasn't part of, and I'd expected to ride this out alone, like always. The staff were shadows too, flitting in and out with their quiet efficiency, but none lingered. So when the bedroom door creaked open and Jim stepped in, his suit jacket slung over his arm, I barely registered it through the haze. "You look like hell," he said, his voice gruff, cutting through the fog in my skull. I tried to sit up, to muster some retort, but my arms shook, and I sank back, a groan escaping my lips. He dropped the jacket on a chair and crossed the room, his footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. "Stay down," he ordered, and before I could protest, he pressed a hand to my forehead, his palm cool against my burning skin. "You're on fire," he muttered, almost to himself, then disappeared into the hall. I closed my eyes, the room spinning, and drifted somewhere between sleep and delirium, Mom's voice echoing faintly. "Rest, Kate. I've got you." When I opened my eyes again, Jim was back, a steaming mug in one hand, a damp cloth in the other. He set the mug on the nightstand, chamomile, I could smell it, and draped the cloth across my brow, the cold a shock that made me flinch. "Drink. This when you can," he said, his tone softer now, less like the man who'd gripped my wrist at the dinner, and more like someone who'd forgotten how to be gentle. I watched him through half-lidded eyes as he pulled a chair closer and sat. His sleeves rolled up, exposing forearms corded with muscle I hadn't noticed before. "Why are you doing this?" I croaked, my voice a rasp, the question slipping out before I could stop it. He paused, his hands stilling on the quilt he'd begun to adjust. "Because I see her in you," he said, so quiet I almost missed it, his gaze dropping to the floor. Her. Anna? The name from the music box flickered in my mind, but my thoughts were too muddled to chase it. Instead, I reached for the mug, my fingers weak, and he took it from me, holding it to my lips. The tea was warm, laced with honey, and a hint of ginger, and as I sipped, a memory surfaced. Mom in our old kitchen, stirring a pot of soup, her smile tired but steady. "You didn't have to," I murmured, the mug trembling as he set it back down. "I can't lose anyone else," he said, the words raw, unguarded, slipping out like a confession he hadn't meant to make. I blinked, the fever blurring the edges of his face, but I saw it then. His eyes, red-rimmed, shadowed with something deeper than exhaustion. Grief, maybe, or guilt. He stood abruptly, turning to the fireplace, and tossed another log onto the flames, the crackle filling the silence. The light danced across his profile, softening the hard lines I'd come to associate with him. I drifted, again, the warmth of the tea and the quilt pulling me under, but his presence lingered, a steady anchor in the haze. Hours later, or minutes, I couldn't tell, I woke to find him still there, slumped in the chair, his head resting on his hand, the mug of tea now cold beside him. The cloth had slipped from my forehead, and I touched it, feeling the dampness, the care he'd put into something so small. My fever hadn't broken, but it felt lighter, less suffocating, and I watched him sleep, his chest rising and falling, a man I'd painted as a monster now looking almost human. A smile tugged at my lips, unbidden, as I remembered Mom's soup, how she'd sit with me through every cold, every heartbreak, her hand steady where mine shook. Jim wasn't her, wasn't family, but this moment, this quiet act, cracked the wall I'd built around him. I didn't trust it, not yet, but it stirred something, a flicker of warmth I hadn't expected to find here, in this penthouse of glass and steel, under the soft firelight. The wind rattled the windows, a low moan that matched the ache in my bones, and I pulled the quilt tighter, my fingers brushing Gran's ring. It was still there, cool and solid, a piece of me that hadn't bent to this life. But as I looked at Jim, his face softened in sleep, I wondered if he carried a piece of his own past, too, one tied to Anna, to the grief he'd let slip. "Who are you?" I whispered, too soft for him to hear, the question hanging in the air like smoke. He stirred then, his eyes opening slowly, meeting mine across the dim room. "You're awake," he said, his voice rough with sleep, and I nodded, too tired to speak. He reached for the cloth, dipping it in a bowl I hadn't noticed, and pressed it back to my forehead, his touch gentler this time. "Rest," he said, and for once I didn't argue, letting my eyes close, the fire's glow seeping through my lids. In that moment, I wasn't just a wife by contract. I was someone he couldn't lose, and that changed everything. The penthouse felt alive that night, its glass walls trembling under the restless push of a late November wind. I stood on the balcony, my bare feet cold against the slate tiles, the city sprawling below me like a map of lights and secrets. It had been 2 days since the fever broke, since Jim's hands had pressed a cloth to my brow, his words, "I can't lose anyone else," echoing in my mind like a riddle I couldn't solve. I, Catherine Sullivan, Kate to the family I'd fought to protect, was still here, still bound to this man, this life. But something had shifted. The air smelled of rain, sharp and electric, and I pulled my sweater tighter, Gran's silver ring glinting faintly on my finger. I'd seen him leave an hour ago, his silhouette sharp in a dark coat as he stepped into the elevator, his face unreadable. But now, through the glass doors, I caught a flicker of movement. Jim, back already, standing alone in the living room, his shoulders slumped in a way I hadn't seen before. He held something small in his hands, turning it over, and as I slid, the door opened, the faint mournful notes of the music box drifted out. the same melody that had haunted me since I'd found it. He didn't hear me at first. His head bowed, and I stepped closer, the wind tugging at my hair. "Anna, forgive me," he whispered, his voice breaking on the words, and I froze, the name a jolt through my chest. Anna, the girl in the photograph, the shadow he carried. I couldn't stay silent. "Who was she?" I asked, my voice cutting through the music, steady despite the storm inside me. He flinched, the box snapping shut in his hands, and turned to face me, his dark eyes wide with something raw, shock maybe, or fear. For a moment, he said nothing, the wind howling between us. Then he set the box on the table, his fingers lingering on its worn edges. "Anna was my sister," he said finally, his voice low, rough, like gravel underfoot. "She died when I was 18, a car accident, or that's what they called it." He looked away, out at the city, his jaw tight. "Our father was a bastard, greedy, ruthless, made enemies in every boardroom he walked into. One of them wanted revenge, and Anna paid the price. A truck ran her off the road. She was 16. The words spilled out, jagged and heavy, and I felt them settle in my chest. A weight I hadn't expected. I stepped closer, the cold seeping through my sweater, and watched him. This man I'd painted as a cold, calculating tyrant. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked, softer now, the question less an accusation than a plea. He laughed, a bitter sound that didn't reach his eyes. "What would it change? You're here because of your father, not me. This," he gestured between us, the penthouse, the city beyond, "was never about trust." But then his gaze met mine, and something cracked, a fissure in the wall he'd built. "Until now." "What do you mean?" I pressed, my heart thudding, sensing the edge of something bigger. He took a breath, deep and unsteady, and stepped toward me, closing the distance until I could feel the heat of him against the night's chill. "I didn't marry you just for your father's debt," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "There's a man out there, Victor Grayson, one of my father's old enemies. He's been watching your family, waiting to strike. Your dad's mess gave him an opening, and I couldn't let him take you down too. Not like Anna." The words hit me like a punch, stealing my breath. I stared at him, the city lights blurring behind him, my mind racing to catch up. "You're saying you married me to protect me?" I asked, disbelief sharpening my tone. He nodded, his eyes locked on mine, steady and unyielding. "I've been tracking Grayson for years. He's ruthless, sees you as leverage, a way to hurt me through your father's failure. I couldn't risk it. Not again." I turned away, my hands gripping the balcony railing, the metal icy under my palms. Protect me. The idea clashed with everything I'd believed about him, about us. I'd seen this marriage as a cage, a sacrifice for Dad and Lily. But now it was something else, something tangled with Jim's own ghosts. "Why didn't you just tell me?" I asked again, my voice trembling now, anger and confusion warring inside me. "Because I didn't think you'd stay," he admitted, stepping closer, his shadow falling over me. "And I couldn't lose you before I even had you." The wind whipped around us, carrying his words away, but they lingered in me, heavy and real. I turned back to him, searching his face, the lines of grief, the resolve in his eyes, and felt something shift, a crack in my own defenses. "You don't have to do this alone," I said, my hand reaching for his, tentative, the first time I'd touched him without force or fear. His fingers closed around mine, warm and firm, and for a moment we stood there, the city a distant hum beneath us. "Come inside," I said, pulling him gently, and he followed, the music box left silent on the table. In the kitchen, I filled the kettle, the routine grounding me as the truth settled in. The water hissed as it heated, and I poured it into 2 mugs, the scent of coffee rising sharp and familiar. I handed him one, our fingers brushing, and he took it, his eyes never leaving mine. "Thank you," he said, and I knew it wasn't just for the coffee. We sat on the sofa, the mug steaming, between us the wind a faint moan beyond the glass. Gran's ring caught the light, a quiet reminder of the strength I'd carried this far. Jim wasn't the man I'd thought, not entirely, and I wasn't the woman I'd been when I walked down that aisle. The dark held truths I hadn't expected, and as I sipped my coffee, its bitterness grounding me, I realized I wasn't ready to walk away. Not yet. The Bentley hummed through the night, its engine a steady growl beneath the chaos in my chest. I sat in the passenger seat, Catherine Sullivan, Kate to the sister I'd sworn to protect, my hands clenched in my lap, Gran's silver ring digging into my palm. The city blurred past, a smear of neon and shadow, the dashboard clock glowing. 10:47 p.m. Jim drove, his grip tight on the wheel, his jaw set like stone since we'd left the penthouse an hour ago. The radio crackled faintly, a news station I hadn't bothered to turn off, until a voice cut through the static. Breaking news. Sources claim Robert Sullivan, father of Catherine Carver, wife of finance mogul James Carver, was involved in a multi-million-dollar fraud scheme. My breath stopped, the words slicing through me like a blade. I reached for the dial, fumbling to silence it, but Jim's hand shot out, turning it up instead. "Leave it," he said, his voice clipped, commanding, as the reporter continued. Sullivan's past ties to Carver Industries have raised questions about the couple's recent marriage. Speculation of a cover-up is mounting. The air in the car thickened, suffocating, and I turned to him, my voice trembling with fury. "Turn it off. Now." He didn't. His eyes fixed on the road, and I slammed my hand against the dashboard, the sound sharp in the confined space. I said, "Turn it off." He swerved the car to the shoulder, tires screeching against asphalt, and killed the engine, the radio dying with it. The silence was deafening, broken only by the distant hum of traffic and my ragged breathing. "You don't get to run from this," he said, his tone low, dangerous, his dark eyes locking onto mine. "This is out there now, your father's mess, our name. You can't leave the house until I handle it." I laughed, a bitter, jagged sound, and shoved the door open, stepping into the cold night, the wind biting at my bare arms. "I'm not a prisoner," I snapped, turning to face him as he climbed out after me. "You don't own me, Jim." He rounded the car, closing the distance in 3 strides, his presence towering, electric. "This isn't about ownership," he said, his voice rising, cracking with something raw. "It's about keeping you safe. Grayson's behind this, stirring it up to get to me, to you." Victor Grayson, the name from the balcony, the enemy who'd taken Anna, flashed in my mind, but it didn't soften the fire in me. "Safe?" I shot back, stepping closer, my chest heaving. "You think hiding me away fixes this? My sister's out there, Lily's alone, and now this is on the news, tearing into her life too. You don't get to decide how I face it." His hands clenched at his sides, his breath visible in the chill, and then, without warning, he pulled me into him, his arms wrapping around me, strong and desperate. His lips crashed against mine, a kiss that was all heat and need, a collision, of anger and something deeper I couldn't name. For a heartbeat, I melted into it, my hands gripping his coat, the taste of him, coffee and salt, flooding my senses. But then reality snapped back, and I pushed him away, hard, my palms slamming against his chest. "This doesn't fix anything," I said, my voice shaking, my lips still tingling from his touch. He staggered back, his eyes wild, dark with a storm I hadn't seen before. "I'm not trying to fix it," he said, his words rough, unguarded. "I'm trying to hold on. To you. To us. To something I didn't even want until you were here. I stared at him, the wind whipping my hair across my face, my heart pounding so loud I could barely think. Us. The word hung there, fragile and impossible, a thread I didn't know how to pull. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed in my pocket, shrill and insistent. I fumbled for it, my hands trembling, and saw Lily's name on the screen. I answered, my voice barely steady. "Kate?" she sobbed, her words tumbling out in a rush. "There are reporters outside my dorm. They're asking about Dad, about you. I don't know what to do." My stomach dropped, the world tilting beneath me. "Lily, listen," I said, forcing calm I didn't feel. "Stay inside. I'm coming to get you." She hiccuped, "Okay," and the line went dead, leaving me staring at the blank screen, her fear echoing in my ears. I turned to Jim, my resolve hardening. "I'm going to her," I said, my tone final, daring him to stop me. He ran a hand through his hair, his face a battleground of frustration and something softer. Worry, maybe. "Not alone," he said, stepping back to the car. "We'll go together." I didn't argue, sliding into the passenger seat as he started the engine, the Bentley roaring back to life. The city streaked past again, headlights slicing through. The dark. But now it felt different. Urgent. Alive with purpose. I gripped Gran's ring, its edges a lifeline as I pictured Lily, her wide eyes, her trust in me. She'd been my anchor through Dad's failures, through Mom's death, and now she needed me more than ever. Jim's hand rested on the gear shift, inches from mine, and I felt the pull of him. The kiss, the confession, tugging at the edges of my anger. "I'm not your doll," had been my shield. But what was it now, when he'd risked his pride to hold me? The radio stayed off, the silence between us thick but not empty. I glanced at him, his profile stark against the passing lights, and saw the man who'd sat by my bedside, who'd whispered Anna's name in the dark. "Thank you," I said, so quiet it almost drowned in the engine's hum. But he heard it, his fingers tightening on the wheel. We drove on, the night stretching ahead, and I knew this wasn't the end. Not of the fight, not of us, but a breaking edge, a line we'd crossed together. The air in the parking garage was damp and stale, thick with the tang of gasoline and rust. I stood in the shadows, Catherine Sullivan, Kate to the sister I'd die for, my wrists bound tight with coarse rope, the concrete cold beneath my bare feet. The gray sweater I'd worn on the balcony clung to me, torn at the sleeve, a casualty of the struggle when Victor Grayson's men yanked me from the cab 2 hours ago. Jim had been right behind me, his Bentley roaring toward Lily's dorm, when the black van cut us off, tires screeching, and I was gone before he could stop them. Now I was here, a pawn in a game I hadn't chosen, my heart pounding as footsteps echoed closer. A man stepped into the dim light, his face scarred and angular, his gray suit sharp against the grime of the place. Victor Grayson. I knew him from Jim's words on the balcony, the enemy who'd taken Anna, who'd turned his grief into a weapon. "You're a pretty bargaining chip, Mrs. Carver," he said, his voice smooth, venomous, a smirk twisting his lips as he circled. "Me. James always did have a weakness for family." I glared at him, my jaw tight, refusing to give him the fear he wanted. "He won't come," I lied, my voice steady despite the ache in my arms. "You're wasting your time." Grayson laughed, a low, guttural sound that bounced off the concrete walls. "Oh, he'll come. He can't help himself. Not after Anna." The name hit me like a slap, but before I could respond, headlights flared at the far end of the garage, and the Bentley rolled in, its engine cutting off with a sharp click. Jim stepped out, his coat flapping in the draft, his face a mask of fury and resolve. "Let her go, Grayson," he called, his voice echoing, firm as steel. "This is between you and me." Grayson's men, 2 shadows in dark jackets, moved to flank him, but Jim didn't flinch, his eyes locked on me, a silent promise in their depths. "I brought what you want," he said, pulling a folder from his coat and tossing it to the ground. It landed with a soft thud, papers spilling out. Contracts, I realized, the kind that could sink or save an empire. "The Hudson deal," Jim continued, his tone flat. 10 years of work yours. Just let her go." My stomach twisted, the weight of his sacrifice sinking in. That deal was his leverage, his lifeline in a world built on power. Grayson bent to pick it up, flipping through the pages with a predator's grin. "You always were soft, Carver," he said, then nodded to his men. One of them stepped forward, a knife glinting in his hand, and I braced myself. But instead of cutting my ropes, he lunged at Jim. The blade flashed, and Jim twisted, too slow, the steel slicing into his side. He grunted, staggering back, blood blooming dark against his white shirt, and I screamed, the sound tearing from my throat. "No!" I yanked at the ropes, my wrists burning, as Jim hit the ground, one hand clutching his side, the other reaching for me. Grayson laughed again, louder this time, and kicked the folder toward Jim's crumpled form. "Your father sold me out 20 years ago," he sneered, his voice dripping with venom. "Took my share of Carver Industries and left me for dead. Now you pay. Everything you've built, gone, just like Anna." The twist landed like a blow. Grayson wasn't just an enemy. He'd been a partner, betrayed by Jim's father, his revenge a decades-long fire. Jim's eyes met mine, pain etching lines into his face. But there was steel there too, a resolve that hadn't broken. "Kate," he rasped, his voice weak but fierce. "You're worth it." My chest tightened, tears blurring my vision, and I pulled harder, the ropes biting into my skin until they snapped, frayed ends falling away. I stumbled forward, dropping to my knees beside him, my hands trembling as I pressed them to his wound, blood hot against my fingers. "You didn't have to do this," I choked out, my voice breaking. "Yes, I did," he said, his hand finding mine, slick with red. "For you." Grayson's men moved in, but I didn't care. My focus narrowing to Jim, the man who'd traded everything for me, who'd carried Anna's death like a cross and now bled for mine. I tore at my sweater, ripping the sleeve free, and pressed it to his side, my hands shaking but steady, a makeshift bandage to hold him together. "Stay with me," I whispered, my tears falling onto his chest, mixing with the blood. He smiled, faint and pained, his fingers tightening around mine. "I'm trying," he murmured, his breath shallow. The sound of sirens pierced the air, distant but growing louder, and Grayson's smirk faltered. "This isn't over," he spat, backing away, his men following as they melted into the shadows. I didn't look up, didn't care. My world was here, on this cold concrete, with Jim's life slipping through my hands. "You're not leaving me," I said, my voice fierce now, a vow of my own. "Not like this." His eyes fluttered, but he nodded, a ghost of a smile lingering as the red and blue lights flashed closer. I held him, the sweater soaking through, Gran's ring glinting red in the dim light, a symbol of the family I'd fought for, now fused with the man I hadn't meant to love. The sirens wailed, boots pounded toward us, but I didn't move, my hands locked on his wound, my heart locked on him. He'd paid a price I couldn't fathom, not just for me, but for Anna, for the sins of a father he couldn't outrun, and as the paramedics swarmed in, pulling me back, I knew I'd pay one too, to keep him here, to rewrite this ending, to hold on to something I'd never thought I'd claim. The old church glowed softly under the late afternoon sun, its amber light spilling through the stained glass windows onto the worn stone steps where it all began. I stood there, Catherine Sullivan, Kate to the family I'd fought to hold together, my hands tucked into the pockets of a wool coat, the air crisp with the promise of winter. It had been 3 weeks since the parking garage, since Jim's blood had stained my hands, since I'd knelt on cold concrete and refused to let him go. Now, he stood beside me, his arm in a sling, his face still pale but alive, the scar beneath his shirt a silent testament to the price he'd paid. The hospital had been a blur, nights of beeping machines, sterile white walls, and whispered prayers. I hadn't spoken since Mom died. Jim had pulled through, the knife missing anything vital by a hair, and I'd stayed, sleeping in a chair by his bed, Gran's ring a constant weight on my finger. Victor Grayson was gone, vanished into the shadows, after the police stormed in, but his shadow lingered, a reminder of the cost of this life we'd stumbled into. Today, though, wasn't about him. It was about us, about the vows we'd made in this church, cold and hollow then, and the ones we'd forged since, unspoken, but real. Jim shifted beside me, his good hand brushing mine, and I looked up at him, his dark eyes softer now, stripped of the armor I'd once despised. "I thought we should come back here," he said, his voice low, steady, the gravel of it smoothed by time. "Where it started." I nodded, my throat tight, and we stepped inside, the scent of lilies and wax wrapping around us like a memory. The pews were empty, the silence vast, but it didn't feel cold anymore, not with him here, not with what we'd survived. He reached into his coat, pulling out the music box, its wooden surface glinting in the dim light. "This was Anna's," he said, opening it, the mournful melody spilling out, softer now, less a wound and more a bridge. "She loved this place. Used to sneak in here when Dad was too drunk to notice. I kept it to remember her, to punish myself for not saving her." He paused, his fingers tracing the lid, then held it out to me. "You're not a deal, Kate. You're my choice. I want you to have it." I took it, my hands trembling, the weight of it more than wood and metal. It was his past, his pain, his trust. "And you're mine," I said, my voice breaking, the words of vow I hadn't planned but meant with every fiber of me. I set the box on a pew, stepping closer, and he pulled me into him, his good arm wrapping around me, strong, despite the sling. His lips found mine, gentle this time, not the desperate clash of the car, but a promise, warm and sure. I kissed him back, my hands resting on his chest, feeling the heartbeat I'd fought to keep. The church door creaked open behind us, and I turned, my breath catching as Lily stepped in, her dark hair spilling over a red scarf, her eyes wide with relief. "Kate!" she called, running to me, and I met her halfway, pulling her into a hug that smelled of her lavender shampoo in the dorm room she'd left behind. "You kept your promise," she whispered, her voice thick, and I pulled, back brushing a tear from her cheek. "Always," I said, my heart swelling as she smiled, the little sister I'd carried through every storm. She glanced at Jim, hesitant, then stepped forward, offering a shy nod. "Thanks for, not dying," she said, and he chuckled, a rare warm sound that lit his face. "I'll take that," he replied, and I saw it then, the family I hadn't expected, pieced together from broken edges. Lily reached into her bag, pulling out a small cloth bundle, and handed it to me. "I found this in my stuff," she said, and I unwrapped it, my breath hitching. Mom's old tea towel, faded but clean, the one she'd used to dry dishes while humming off key. "You kept us together," Lily added, her eyes shining, and I clutched it, the fabric soft against my skin. We moved to the altar, the three of us, and I set the music box beside the towel, a quiet altar of our own. "Let's make tea," I said, the idea sudden but right, and Jim raised an eyebrow, amused. "Here?" he asked, but he followed me to the small kitchen off the vestry, Lily trailing behind. I found a kettle, battered but functional, and filled it from a sink that sputtered to life, the water hissing as it heated. Jim rummaged through a cabinet, pulling out a tin of chamomile, and Lily laughed, the sound bright in the dim space. "You're hopeless," she teased him, and he grinned, handing her the tin. The tea steeped, its scent mingling with the church's stillness, and we carried the mugs back to the pews, sitting close, the warmth seeping into our hands. Jim's shoulder brushed mine. Lily's knee pressed against my leg, and I sipped, the taste grounding me in this moment. Here. Now. With them. "I'm sorry," Jim said suddenly, his voice low, his eyes on the mug. "For dragging you into this, for not telling you sooner." I shook my head, reaching for his hand. "You saved me," I said, and meant it. Not just from Grayson, but from the loneliness I'd carried too long. Lily leaned her head on my shoulder, and I felt Gran's ring, cool and steady, a thread through it all. Mom, Lily, Jim, me. The lights above us flickered, renewed, and I looked out at the church. No longer a place of cold oaths, but a sanctuary we'd claimed. We'd paid a price. Blood, trust, years of guilt. But we'd found something too. A family forged in the dark, lit by the quiet strength of love. The tea cooled, the day faded, and I knew this was enough. Not perfect, but ours. If this journey of love, sacrifice, and redemption touched your heart, don't forget to hit that like button. It means the world to me. And if you want more stories that dive deep into the soul and light up the dark, subscribe now. Let's keep this fire burning together.